Shit is going down in Marciano versus Demi, and nobody's talking about it. I'm not really sure why. So I'm going to talk about it. There's some pretty cool legal issues arising in that case. For those of you who don't know, I have a video on it. I'm going to go in this weekend and try to organize my videos and make more playlists for every case since I'm now covering so many cases. But Marciano, from wherever the fuck he was from, sued Demi from Secret Lives of Mormon Wives based on allegations she made that he SA'd her at the Vanderpump Villa in Italy, I think, that she then talked about on the show and talked about in various media appearances. He sued her and the production company, which I think is called Jeff Jenkins Productions, for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress and tortious interference and all that stuff, saying, I have now been branded as one of those guys, and this is how I make my living, and I can't make my living anymore, and somebody needs to pay for it. Now, it's interesting because even though Demi and the production company are on the same side of the V, they are litigating this completely separately. I don't know if their lawyers even talk to each other or not. I don't know what Demi's status is with that organization. But they are making totally separate arguments, and each one of them is defending only themselves. So that has to tell us something. Demi has taken the route of free speech. You cannot sue me for things I said as part of making a television show because that is protected speech. And she has filed a pro-speech motion, otherwise known as an anti-slap motion. I'm trying to change the language. A pro-speech motion, and that has been fully briefed and is pending in front of the federal court in Utah where this case was filed. They'll probably have to have a hearing on it, I imagine. But now the production company, Jeff Jenkins Productions, has filed its own dispositive motions. Rather than filing a motion to dismiss, Jeff Jenkins Productions chose to answer the complaint, right? So instead of taking the first off-ramp that a defendant gets to say, based on the law, we don't need to go any further, they decided to go ahead and file their answer saying what they agreed with and what they didn't and setting forth their affirmative defenses. And then they immediately filed the next two off-ramps, which are a motion for judgment on the pleadings and a motion for summary judgment. Now, a motion for judgment on the pleadings can be filed anytime after the pleadings are closed. So once there's a complaint and an answer, the pleadings are closed. And it argues, as a matter of law, there is no need to go any further. A motion for summary judgment can also technically be filed anytime after the pleadings close. But the standard for it is usually there's no genuine issue of material fact, meaning it has to consider evidence. Motion for judgment on the pleadings does not consider evidence. It only considers the pleadings. Motion for summary judgment considers the evidence. However, you can file a motion for summary judgment right out of the gate if you can argue that we could discover all of the information in the world and it's not going to change anything because these are the only facts that matter. And that is what Jeff Jenkins has done. Now, the motion for judgment on the pleadings is the one that I think is probably the weakest. It is making the argument that that Marciano cannot possibly allege or ever discover or ever prove actual malice on the part of the production company, basically because they're not in a position to know whether or not what Demi says is the truth or not. So they're sort of arguing it's a capacity issue of, you know, how the fuck are we supposed to know, right? Because remember, for defamation, you have to have a false statement about the plaintiff that gets published, and that publication causes damages. But if the plaintiff is a public figure, which we are living in a time when Marciano is a public figure, then you also have to allege and prove actual malice, meaning that when they made the defamatory statement, they either knew that it was false or they acted with reckless disregard for the truth. And the argument that the production company makes is, how are we supposed to fucking know whether that woman is telling the truth? This is a reality show. We don't have like a fact-checking department, right? And it's funny because reality falls in this funny area, right? If it was a documentary, it would be easy to argue like it's a documentary. You're trying to educate people. You have to know whether it's true. If it is a scripted show, you argue this is art. It's all fiction. It doesn't matter. But reality sits right in the middle. And so the argument they make is, how the fuck were we supposed to know? There's no way that anyone could ever find that we had a responsibility, and all the discovery in the world doesn't matter. All the depositions and document requests and interrogatories don't matter, because as a matter of law, we cannot possibly have had actual malice because we had no responsibility in the first place. The response that Marciano makes to that is, you didn't even try. These were very serious allegations. These are not allegations that like I'm a bad kisser. These are allegations of SA. This is as serious as it gets, especially for somebody like me who makes their living being like a, Lothario on reality TV shows. Which he actually kind of says in there, like he's a Casanova type character. But then they say, and I find this interesting as someone who watches the show, she's lied about stuff like this before. And they cite the situation, and it's in the complaint, where I think it was in season 2, and Demi said that Miranda's ex-husband, that weird guy that everybody hooks up with for some strange reason, shoved her at a party. And when we saw the video, what he literally did was walk by her and go like that. And it was like, that wasn't a shove. And so the argument Marciano, remember she sent her like weird chode husband after him. God, who do you pick in that fight? But anyway, so Marciano says, this woman has made things up before on camera. You have seen her do it. So you at least have some responsibility to check and see if when she makes the biggest allegation there is, if that's true too. So we'll see how that one shakes out. But the one I find more interesting is the motion for summary judgment. Now, this has to be filed as a motion for summary judgment because it asks the court to consider information beyond just the complaint and the answer. It asks the court to consider evidence. And that evidence is the performer agreement that Marciano signed to be on Secret Lives and a release that he signed, a waiver that he signed from the production company. And just so you know, when you sign a waiver, like if you're at the bouncy house place or whatever, and you sign some waiver and you sign your life away, the way that shows up legally is as a defense. It doesn't actually stop anybody from suing you. Anybody can sue anybody for anything. But what it does is it sets it up as a defense. I'm going to stop this case right here because they waived their right to bring this case. So they are bringing these things in as a defense and saying, we don't need to get to the next step, which is discovery, because none of that shit matters, because he cannot bring these claims as a matter of law based on the contracts that he signed. The first one is this performer's agreement that has this paragraph in it that basically says, we can edit you however we want, and no matter how unfavorable it is, and no matter, look, it says, may expose artists, friends, coworkers, or family to public ridicule, humiliation, or condemnation. It doesn't matter. You agreed to all of this. You assumed the risk of all of this, and you cannot, therefore, come back and sue us over it. The second thing is a release that he signed before this stuff could be put out there that says, hey, to the maximum extent the law allows, I am releasing the production company. This is just for Jeff Jenkins. Remember, this doesn't apply to Demi the person. I release you from all claims arising out of this filming, including, if you get about 2/3 of the way down there, without limitation, negligence, rights of public and defamation, false light, infliction of emotional distress. Like, they know what claims people are going to bring. So it's like, okay, they've got a pretty good argument here that he waived his right to bring these claims. He has released his right to bring these claims. And you think, like, that's a pretty good summary judgment argument. That makes it easy for a judge to be like, you signed a contract. There's no issue of fact for a jury to decide because as a matter of law, you can't bring these claims because you signed something that says that you can't. But what Marciano says in his response is, first of all, you sent me that release after I had filed this lawsuit against you. So was it a release or was it a settlement? Like, what the fuck was this supposed to be? It's not like I signed it before, I signed it after. And also, you sent it to me with an hour turnaround while I was in a bar telling me I had to sign it and that you'd pay me for it. And I just signed it and sent it back. But he's making all these arguments that there was no meeting of the minds. This was an adhesion contract I couldn't negotiate. There was no consideration because you made me sign it and I didn't get paid for it, even though you told me you would. So he is challenging the enforceability of this very waiver, which to me creates a fact issue, which probably means no summary judgment. So it's actually pretty spicy over there. Let me know what questions you have.